Hey folks, welcome back to my channel, Designs by Dana. I'm Dana. Today I'm going to do a single page layout, and I'm using this paper from a Little Latte paper packet. And these are just some scraps that I have left over from the paper packet. And you can see here, this is intended to be kind of a coffee themed paper packet. And I like it because it is coffee themed, but I think it's very versatile. So you've got this kind of splattered pattern here. And then we've got a real nice generic stripe pattern. Again, you've got a swirl here and a swirl here. And then you've got this, I guess it can go either way, the little hearts kind of swirled into what you might think of as in your coffee or tea. And then let's move on here. We've got some more of that stripe pattern. Here's just a fun plaid that can be used for just about anything. And on the other side, we've got some coffee beans. I really like this paper here, and this is the paper that really inspired me and made me think of doing this paper. It looks like kind of a coffee swirl. I think that it can also be used for mud, for fudge. You're going to see I'm using this paper for my layout tonight because I'm using it for pie. And it made me think of the pie that I'm doing is kind of a chocolate peanut butter pie. So that's what really drove me to this paper packet. And then here we have some more coffee beans in a different color scheme. And this paper is really fun with the coffee mugs. This one, if you have the stamp set that coordinates, it has dies that will cut these out for you. So lots of fun there with the little coffee stains and then little coffee mugs as well. And I'm not a coffee drinker, so I choose to think of these as little hot cocoa mugs. So lots of versatility in this paper packet. So let me just kind of stack all of this up and then bring in my photos that I'm going to use for my layout here. So I'm just got two photos that I want to scrap here. So hence just the single page here. And this is my birthday pie from last month in September. And I found this recipe for a Reese's peanut butter pie on Facebook. And I sent it to my daughter and I said, I want you to make this for me for my birthday. And she said, no. So I sent it to a really good friend of mine and said, will you make this for me for my birthday? And she said, of course I will. So this is the pie that she made me. And guys, let me tell you, this pie was so good. I've been dreaming about having this pie again. So I really wanted to scrapbook, obviously, my birthday and my pie and just how good this pie really is. So I just have these two photos, but I wanted to show you, I print my pictures on a Canon selfie, so I do print at home. And I printed this one out the first time, and I'm not quite sure what happened here, but it didn't print well. So I had to do a retake. So I do have this, and I was really disappointed that I had to waste this, but I decided to hang on to it because I thought maybe I could cut this out and use it as some type of embellishment or something. So I have this. I'm going to set it to the side and think about a creative way that I could try to use this to embellish my page. So that's going to be kind of on my radar to think about how I can use that so I don't feel like I'm wasting that whole photo. So these are my photos, and again, I have the papers, but I want to show you some other pieces that I'm drawing some inspiration from. So I recently just got this stamp set in that is More Than Autumn, and I'm pulling inspiration from this little pie piece here, because I'm typically not a pie eater. So just the whole concept of this pie is really kind of out of character for me. So this stamp set was one that I might not have boxed. I don't drink coffee and I'm really not a pie eater, but I think of hot chocolate again and how versatile I can make some of these things work for me. And so it's got the hot chocolate and the donuts in the fall season. So I felt like this was still worth the purchase because it was versatile enough that I could make it work for multiple purposes. And then I also pulled in this So Swirly embossing folder because it does coordinate with that paper. And I thought that I might be able to pull that in to do some embossing on my cardstock as well, just to get some of that swirl tied in. So these are some things that I wanted to try to draw inspiration from for embellishments and pulling everything in together. So what I'm going to do is start cutting down some paper and getting some ideas on how I want to lay out some of these colors. So I'm thinking that this blue, it's very close to the blue in the shirt that I'm wearing, that I think will work as long as it's not right next to, the photo. So I was kind of thinking about making it over here at kind of like a sidebar and doing something like that. And then I'm thinking about pulling in this one. Obviously, I want this swirl because it makes me think of like the peanut butter and chocolate kind of all blending together. So I want to pull this in. And I think this would just add some nice color variety into the layout as well. And I don't see a need for either of these, so I'm going to go ahead and throw those aside. So I think that these really are my main colors. Although, let's see, I think there's one perhaps on the back here. Yeah, I think I could also use this one as well if I wanted to add in an additional one. So let's see, I could do that if I wanted to add in some extra. So that gives me the 5 different options to work with. So one of the things I was thinking about with this layout, I saw somebody else do something and I wanted to keep it kind of simple. So what I was thinking about is cutting triangles to go up and down the kind of off-centered, and then have the photo right here. So triangles going up and triangles coming down. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to cut these into squares and then we'll cut them into triangles and see what we think of that. So let me get some of this cut down and we'll see what we think about it. Okay, so I brought in my base page here and I decided to use a colored cardstock using crumb cake, and I'm cutting my squares down. So I'm using a 3.5 by 3.5 inch square. I wanted to show you how I'm making my triangles. So I'm just putting that in my paper trimmer at the diagonal and cutting from corner to corner. And I wanted to show you that I'm bringing in my 3D embossing folder, which is called So Swirly, and it matches my pattern paper here perfectly. So I embossed that paper in the white cardstock, and I just think it's going to give it a nice contrast between the white and the crumb cake on the right hand side. And now I'm just taking all of the different patterns of paper and layering those from the bottom up and then the top down, so they'll kind of meet right in the middle of the paper. And I'll work on finalizing that spacing as I glue that down, but this kind of gives me a good idea of what my dry fit's going to look like. And then just to give it a little bit of an offset feature, I want to put a couple over here on the right hand side. So I'll play around with which 2 patterns I want to put over there. But this is how I want my pictures laid out. Now I do have this pumpkin stamp that I wanted to use. So I'm going to bring in one of my favorite dies. This is Spotlight on Nature. And I cut 2 of those. I really like this white piece because it does remind me of a paper plate. And I think I've mentioned that in some of my previous videos as well. So I cut this pumpkin and I used some markers to color it in, and I really tried to emulate the kind of the gooiness of the pie here. So I want to show you how I colored that in. I'm bringing in some of my Stampin' Blend markers. So I'm going to start with the Pecan Pie marker, and I'm using the light and the dark shades. So I zoom in a little bit here so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. And I'm just making some little circle motions here all over the piece of pie with the light, and then I'm going to come back in and add some texture with the darker shade throughout as I fill in the space of the pie. And once I have that done, I'm going to come in with, this is a Prismacolor Premier marker. This is a dark umber, so I didn't have a color that matched in the Stampin' Blends. So now I'm kind of filling in the gaps with the dark color. So this is going to represent the darker chocolate within the pie, whereas the Pecan Pie more represented the peanut butter. So I'm kind of making everything blend in together. And then also this will represent the chocolate in the pie crust. So you can see as I'm kind of putting all of this color down, how well it just kind of blends and melds together. Now I didn't quite get my crust as dark as I wanted it, so I'm bringing in another marker here to darken that up and just add a little bit more darkness to the center of the pie and darken up that crust. So let me hold that up and you can get a little bit closer view of how that looks up close. So I was really happy with how that texture turned out on the pie. So looking at that stamp set, again, it has this saying that says, "This calls for," and then another stamp that says pie. So I wanted to put that on this little embellishment piece I'm creating. Now, one thing that's great about acrylic stamps is you can shape them. So I used my circle as a guide, and then I just curved that stamp so it would line up right with the circle shape there and stamped it. So one really bonus that you have with the polymer stamps opposed to the cling stamps, and I really liked that. So I wanted some more ephemera on this page, so I went to my stash and I pulled out this Kitchen Gnomes set. I don't have a lot of really cooking stamp sets, so this one I thought worked well. I decided to use the little female gnome for the cooking because it kind of represents my friend that made the pie for me. My friend Laurel is, she has blonde hair, so I really liked this little girl gnome cooking, and I wanted to make it a little blonde-headed gnome cooking, making my pie. So I'm bringing in my markers, and I'm going to just quickly show you how I colored in my gnome. I did it pretty simplistically, not a lot of shading. So for the skin tone color, I am using the Petal Pink Stampin' Blends, and then I'll move on to the hair. To represent the blonde hair, I used the Lemon Lolly. I wanted to also tie into the colors that coordinate with that plaid paper that I'm using in the layout. So I looked at my paper packet and pulled in the colors that coordinate with that as well. So the Lemon Lolly, the yellow, kind of represents the blonde hair look. Now for the mixing bowl, I am using the dark Lagoon, or actually just the Lost Lagoon, the light and the dark shade of that. So I'm starting with the light, and then I will add some of the dark for the shading in the mixing bowl. And then for the hat and the little, I guess it's an apron, I'm not sure, apron or dress, I'm using Calypso Coral. So again, I'm going to start with the light shade and move to the dark. Now notice as I do the light shade here, especially on the top of the hat, I didn't take the marker all the way to the edge of my stamped image. I find that with the Stampin' Blends markers, they do tend to bleed a little bit. So I left a little bit of space there because it will bleed out. And then also when I add my dark blend around the stamped image, that way I don't bleed out too much outside of the stamped image. So that is just one thing I have learned with the Stampin' Blends as opposed to some other alcohol markers that I've used in the past. And that can also vary depending on what type of cardstock or paper that you're working with. So just be cautious of that depending on what papers you're using as to how much or little the markers will bleed. So I'm adding the dark shade here just to add in some blending and shading to her hat and her, we'll call it a dress. I'm not sure if it's a dress or an apron. But I want to bring back the light in just to kind of blend out the harshness of those lines. So I'm going to bring in the light and then go back over the lines and add in a little bit more layers to especially the hat. And I think she turned out just really, really cute. So I'm going to cut her out. I do have a matching die to cut her out. And I also stamped an extra bowl and an extra spoon. So I'm quickly going to color this bowl in basically the same technique, starting with the light Stampin' Blends in the Lost Lagoon and then coming back over it with the darker shade just to add in, again, that shading and texture. Now for the spoon, I forgot to pull out a nice gray, thinking I would want kind of like a silver metallic spoon. And I probably could have used a brown to go along with the browns in the paper, but I ended up using a gray. So there I'm thinking how I can position that, but I kind of thought it might need something to ground it. So I pulled out another stamp set from my stash. This is the Freshly Baked scrapbooking stamp. And I like this. It's meant to be, I think, a cooling rack, but I think it will make a nice little grounding piece. And I thought I could probably cut it in half and use the other half somewhere else on the page. So went ahead and cut that out and tucked it under. And I kind of like how that adds some additional textures to the page as well. And I'm thinking I might be able to use the other half over here under this little embellishment piece with my little pies. So I went to my stash. I was looking for a journaling piece, but I found some of my old Picture My Life cards, and I found this one here, and I really liked how it had the silverware. So when I started thinking about this layout, I thought it would be cool to have a fork to go with my pie, and I didn't have any fork stamps. So I was really happy when I found this card that had the fork, the spoon, and the knife. So I decided to go ahead and fussy cut these out because I thought I could certainly put them on here somewhere, and the colors seem to match quite well. So I cut those out, and then on the other side of this card, I had these almost like a little menu thing that said today's menu, and then it had a spot for breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert. I didn't want to use all of that, so I just used the little dessert piece. And I put the name of the recipe, which is called Reese's Peanut Butter Pie. So I thought that would be a good little kind of embellishment piece. Then I did find another Picture My Life card that I could use for the journaling. So I went ahead and did my journaling and thought I could put that down here in the lower right. But I still wanted to add my title. And for my title, I wanted to use birthday pie instead of birthday cake or happy birthday. So I went with birthday pie. Now what I did when I cut this out, I actually cut it out 5 times in cardstock and then once in the pattern paper. So I glued all of the cardstock pieces together, and then I'm showing you here that I'm gluing the pattern paper right on top. That gave me a really nice, thick, almost chipboard type element to use for my title pieces. Because these were so small, I didn't want to have to deal with trying to pop them up with foam tape, and this gives me that dimension without having to use the foam tape. So I wanted to work on this journaling because I felt like it was just too busy down here at the bottom. So I went back to my stash and I found these little tabs I had. I pulled up that photo and ended up putting some foam tape behind it so I could make just a pocket there and stick my journaling behind it. So I'm going to use these little tabs, and you can see how I'm showing you that it just peels back, folds over, and it creates a tab. And now I can just pop my journaling right behind that photo and it will slide out. It creates the a less busy page as opposed to having that journaling down there in the bottom right, and gives the eye just a little bit of resting space. So I still want to use my silverware, so I'm thinking I could just tuck the little fork and spoon in here, and we'll leave the knife off. So as one final last touch for the layout, I'm pulling in my adhesive backed swirl dots. They really match this latte paper quite well. So you can see I'm still struggling learning to use that pick tool, but I'm forcing myself to practice. So bear with me while I struggle through that, and just add some of these dots to the layout as final touches and embellishing. One thing I also wanted to mention, if you remember in the beginning, I had that extra photo that I didn't want to waste. It's a little bit hard to tell here in the photos, but I did cut that pie out and I popped it up right on top of the original picture. So I've got that dimension right there in the photo. So that's the finished layout. Enjoy a couple of my still shots, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Thanks so much for watching today, and we will see you all again soon.